In 2023, Jalen Hurts tied Josh Allen for the most rushing touchdowns among quarterbacks in the NFL. And I'm here to tell you why. If Jalen Hurts wants to be among the best in the league, he could be the front runner for that statistic in 2024. All that and more coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome on into another edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. And thank you to our everydayers for making us your first listen each and every day, whether you're watching on YouTube, listening wherever you get your pods. We thank you. Make sure you subscribe to get 5 shows each and every week. Lou and I have been doing this thing now for almost 7 seasons. We're about to hit episode 1400. Actually, today's episode is 1399 for Lou and I as a duo. And on today's episode, I'm going to start up a new type of show that Lou and I are going to get into here over the next couple weeks leading up to training camp. And these are our top 5 shows. And on today's show, we're going to get into top 5 players on the Eagles who are most likely to lead their position group amongst their peers in the NFL in certain statistics. As well, it's Wednesday. We talked about getting more segments weekly here, and it is What's the Word Wednesday, a take outside of the Eagles. And I think everybody has their minds and ears to Hard Knocks and what the Giants put on TV yesterday in some interesting ways that some of us who like team building, I think, got some interesting facts out of it. And today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms do apply, and we thank Game Time for sponsoring us here at the Locked On Eagles podcast. And as we get into this discussion of these top 5 talks, I thought it was interesting that for the first time in a while, the Eagles have some individuals on their team who have the ability and are going to be set up to potentially lead their position group, whether that's passing yards as a quarterback, whether that's interceptions as a defensive back, just some of the examples. I think the Eagles have some legitimate studs at different positions that could be number 1, potentially number 2 or 3, even in the top 5 or 10 at their respective positions. It could be different for you. It could be different for Lou. I wish he was here today to talk about it, but these are my 5. I'm going to get into 5 through 3 right now. When we come back, I'm going to get into 2 and 1. And then when we finish the show, we're going to talk some Saquon Barkley and the Giants. So to start things off, at number 5, I have Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, most likely leading the NFL in interceptions at the safety position. Now, why do I say this? Well, look at 2 years ago. He was set up for success in that Eagles defense where he was able to play a multitude of different positions. And that was under Jonathan Gannon. Now with Vic Fangio, he's going to be potentially set up better and have more opportunities to make plays on the ball. Yeah, that was a big number a couple years ago, 6 interceptions. But at the safety position, could 6 get the job done yet again? I think so. He was among the top in the entire league, regardless of position, cornerback, safety, 2 years ago. If he plays all 17 games and Vic Fangio uses him how I think a lot of people believe he is going to be used, as this free roaming type of player who at the same time is going to be a matchup type of chess piece that you could put on bigger tight ends, but at the same time he can play the backside of these zone-heavy looks that they're going to play in a Fangio scheme where he can just make plays on the ball by keeping his eyes to the football, but at the same time, he's athletic enough to do these zone and speed turns to flip his hips and make a contested catch against these wide receivers on these post or these seam routes where his back is to the ball. He's a do-it-all type of safety, so why can't he do it all on the back end yet again and get 6 interceptions this season? I had it at 5 because interceptions, that's one of those things that kind of bobs and weaves when it comes to statistics. I think defensively, some things like sacks kind of level out for guys like BG, and you saw Fletcher Cox there, and Hassan Riddick, you knew he was going to be above 10. Interceptions, it's kind of up and down for all these guys. Look at Darius Slay. That's one number, even though he's making plays on the ball, it doesn't always come in the form of interceptions, although he still is making plays on the ball, and hence why Lou did that show a couple days ago saying he still should be the starter at CB1. Moving on, top 5. Number 4, what is most likely, or who is most likely, rather, excuse me, I'm getting our segments mixed up here, to lead their position group in any certain statistic in the NFL. At number 4, talk about Saquon. I believe Saquon, for all running backs, has the possibility to lead the NFL in all-purpose yards, rushing yards, passing yards. I put it as 4th most likely in this top 5 because there's going to be a lot of people at that position that can challenge him. I think Christian McCaffrey right now is the front runner, of course. Josh Jacobs is going to be in the equation. I think some of these rookies are going to have some opportunities to make some names for themselves. But looking at how Kellen Moore, and this is going back in time, retrospectively here, looking at what he did with Austin Eckler and looking at what he did with the combination of Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard and how he was able to utilize these backs in more than just a one-dimensional role, which outside of, we've said it probably 100 times on this show in the 1,400 episodes that we've done. Rookie Miles Sanders was the last time this team has had a running back that was multi-dimensional as a pass catcher and a rusher. I think the best way as well to utilize Saquon and not hand the ball off to a $12 million running back, tongue-in-cheek on that one, is to set him up in the pass game. Set him up on these simple option routes, these Texas routes, where he's able to just go up. Hey, if the linebacker is playing outside leverage, well, I'm going to go inside. If he's playing inside leverage, I'm going to go outside. He's going to be able to be utilized on these swing routes. Hopefully the screen game is better. And you're not just handing the ball off to him 35 to 40 times a game, which would be a stupid way to use a player like Saquon Barkley. You have to use him in a multifaceted way. Can that exceed the likes of some players like Christian McCaffrey and Josh Jacobs, as I had said, at the running back position? To be determined. Can he challenge it? Does he have the ability to? And will the offense be set up for him? I think all 3 of those facets, all 3 of those boxes should be checked. And Saquon has the ability to potentially lead the NFL in all-purpose yards from the running back position. Number 3, top 5, most likely individuals on the Eagles to lead their respective position amongst their peers in the NFL. Number 3, and maybe this probably could be number 1, but I like to talk QB number 1, and QB is the most important. It probably could be number 2 as well because it's happened so many times. Lane Johnson allowing the fewest sacks among right tackles. What more needs to be said? You see Haley's Comet about as many times as you see Lane Johnson allow a sack. Now, he's aging, of course, and I'm sure they're going to be a little bit more prevalent as he gets into his older years in the NFL, and not the same consistency having Jason Kelce there as well. But Lane Johnson, if you're going to bet on a high floor, know what he is going to be player, down in and down out, it's your right tackle. It's evident. He's still so good. He's still incredibly good. He's still in incredible shape. I mean, whatever workout routine he's in now, he's probably in the best shape of his life, and you knew he's had that ankle injury for the longest time. And hey, if he plays healthy, 100% healthy, I'd love to see him shut down some of the best names. You're going to have to if Jalen Hurts and this offense wants to produce at the level that could potentially put some other offensive candidates at the top of their position. And that's what I'm going to get into as I continue along this episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast. So don't go anywhere. Coming right back after this. This Wednesday edition of LOE is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Here in Colorado, it's summertime. Summertime, baseball, hot dogs, a couple beverages. What can go better? You go and watch some baseball, get the mountain views in the background. Wherever you are in the States, I know our fans in Philly, they love going to see the Phils down at CBP. Get your tickets over at Game Time today. They have last minute deals, save up to 60% when you're buying last minute for sports, comedy shows, concerts. You want to go to the theater? My wife loves herself a musical, can get tickets for that as well. You can see a panoramic view of your seat without even having to click into the ticket. And if you want to get in on the action to grab a ticket to an MLB game, any concert you want to go to, download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Continuing along on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Welcome on back. I'm Gino Camilleri, your host. Thank you to our everydayers for joining us here on Let's Be Real, the best Eagles podcast that there is. We're about to hit 1,400 episodes as a duo. I'm sure there is nobody that has done it for as long as we have. And more people are tuning in, so make sure you subscribe wherever you are getting your show. And folks, if you like what we're doing here at LOE and you're sick of watching Fox Sports and ESPN because you have to turn down the volume all day long with that shouting, and I'm doing my best here to limit the shouting. We're all going to therapy, getting better day by day, but make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 streaming channel programmed for your everyday to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. And as we continue this discussion here on LOE today about the top 5 most likely individuals to lead their position amongst their peers in certain statistics. Before we get into number 2 and close it out with the bing bang at number 1, I had a couple of honorable mentions here. And if you're listening along, tweet me at GC24_football, or if you're on YouTube, comment in the comments, what would your top 5 most likely be? But here's some honorable mentions. I had 2. The other day, I said that Jalen Carter could potentially be the guy that challenges the throne in Philadelphia right now to be the next guy up to lead this team in sacks. Could he be the one guy on the interior defensive line to potentially lead the league in sacks at that position? If he's as good as we continue to advertise here, and a lot of those advanced metrics and heck, turn on the film, it's evident. If he plays that way that he has shown, why can't he be amongst the top? If we keep preaching him to be the next one, the next 99, he has to. He has to. Or we are just saying it in a blasphemous tone. But he has the ability. Teams are going to double the heck out of Jalen Carter. But he's a dog. And I believe he's going to get to the quarterback a lot more than he did in 2023. And you knew I couldn't go a show without talking special teams. Another honorable mention before we get into number 2 and number 1. Britton Covey, as a punt returner, I believe he can lead all punt returners in yards per punt return. He was top 3 in all respective categories as a punt returner last year. He's only going to get better. I believe if he wants to seriously cement himself as a 53 guy, outside of just a special teams role. He's going to have to develop as a wide receiver, which at the same time could help his ability to potentially be a kick returner with the new rules and potentially add some wiggle to his punt return game with some newfound elements to his ability as a wide receiver. I keep preaching Britton Covey, but you got to be more than a one-dimensional guy in the NFL. Yes, special teams can take you a long way. He's got to push the envelope as a wide receiver, but he's going to push the rest of the league as a punt returner like we know he could in 2023. So Jalen Carter, Britton Covey, there's some honorable mentions, but number 2 and number 1 coming up right now. Number 2, A.J. Brown, receiving yards amongst all wide receivers. This one is a little, this one's pushing the envelope a bit. This one's pushing the envelope. Should it have been maybe a less confident pick than number 2? Potentially. But man, if you can capture that 6-game stretch of what A.J. Brown was able to do in 2023 in an offense, which did not help out the wide receivers, which did not help out the playmakers at all. But he went 6 games where there was nobody in the league that could stop him. He was getting close to 200 yards every single game. If he does that, and they're going to feed him, Nick Sirianni, one thing that he doesn't lie about, our offense runs through the big 3 in the passing game, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert. A.J.'s on the field for 17 games. Kellen Moore finds a way to help him out just a bit. If they go from 32nd in motion to 15th even, I mean, heck, even to 20th or 25th, these wide receivers are going to be better off. And how much more added value does that bring to A.J. Brown's game as a wide receiver? A ton. Because at the same time, your quarterback, who's going to be number 1 here, but not for passing yards. Although I do think he elevates his game in that regard, and it'll be added to A.J. Brown as a receiver and Devontae Smith elevating his game as well, and potentially having 2 guys that could get close to 1,500 yards, and what Saquon can do as a pass catcher, and a healthy Dallas Goedert, and now these role players. The Eagles' offense is going to be balanced. And bringing the balance in the run game is going to help everybody else out. It's going to help out Saquon in the pass game. It's going to help out these receivers in the pass game. It's going to help out the line of scrimmage just get back to their confident ways. And a fully healthy run game cannot be discussed without Jalen Hurts as a rusher. Last year, with a total number of 15 rushing touchdowns, yes, a lot of the time there was the tush-push element to it, but you don't call number 1's number in that situation every single time without knowing that it's going to work. And why did they do it? Because it freaking worked. And you know what worked in 2022? Jalen Hurts as a healthy rusher. If he's fully healthy, now with Saquon, now with more motion and eyeballs moving for the defenders, Jalen Hurts in the option game should only bring more opportunities to break off some of these chunky yardage runs. I think Lamar and that offense is more styled to get more yardage out of that player. Lamar is more a Mike Vick type of, wow, you can break off these crazy runs, and at the same time, he's not going to be the guy that Jalen Hurts is, where he's still top in the league in all of these pocket respective categories. And that's no disrespect to Lamar. It's just saying that Jalen was very, very good in all of these pocket respective categories. So teams have to respect that passing element of Jalen Hurts. And at the same time, if he gets back to that rushing way that he showed in 2022, in 2021, in 2020, out of necessity though, and Kellen Moore can dial up some of these runs, which you know work, you can't take that away from the offense. You can't hamstring them. And the point to Lamar, that's because he's so freaking good at what he does. You can't take that away from him. But Jalen Hurts, if he does it as they dial up the plays, which Kellen Moore should be more suited to hopefully take some hits away from him, and they're not going to take the ball out of his hands on these tush-push situations. Yeah, they'll probably give Saquon more opportunities, but hey, if one can put it in his elbow, get two guys behind him, that thing's going in for 6. Josh Allen's going to challenge him in this department. Lamar Jackson is going to challenge him in this department. But if he wants to be the MVP, that's why I put this at number 1. If he wants to be the MVP, this category, this is putting your team on your back. In those moments that matter, that Buffalo moment when you ran that sucker into the end zone, that's why we're talking about this right now. And that was me talking about our first top 5 episode. I hope you liked it. We're continuing on, though. We're not done here. We still have to talk about what's the word Wednesday, but leave your top 5 of Eagles that you think could lead the league among their peers in any statistical category, and tell me why I'm right, tell me why I'm wrong, but at least subscribe to the show, and that'll make it a little bit better if you do disagree with me. But don't go anywhere. Continuing along on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, I'm Gino Camilleri. I'm not going anywhere. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Gino Camilleri finishing up the show here. Make sure you subscribe, whether you're watching or listening along. And thank you to all of the everydayers for tuning in each and every day. And before we finish up, we have a new segment. As promised, it's What's the Word Wednesday. And What's the Word Wednesday isn't going to be about the Philadelphia Eagles. It's going to be about the other 31 teams, or potentially about the NFL in general. But today we're going to focus on the New York Giants, and I think it's on cue, or in the queue rather, to add this to the discussion about what was said on the topic of Saquon Barkley on the new offseason edition of Hard Knocks that the Giants had their first premiere episode on yesterday. And I love stuff like that. Let me preface by saying this, that the behind-the-scenes access, if there was more of it, I think it would give too much game plan away to everybody else, and it would make the puzzle a little bit easier for people to figure out. But for individuals that aren't in that realm, it's cool to see the behind-the-scenes, see how they discuss players, see their process, see how they link personnel with how the coaches and how the scouts view it, and how it could be different from team to team. But at the same time, when the cameras are on, you got to be held accountable for the things you say. And we've done it 1,399 times here at the Locked On Eagles podcast. And Joe Shane, he did it for his first time yesterday on Hard Knocks, and he hit us with an all-timer. And shout out to my co-host Lou. The words he put to this were a little bit kinder, or not so kind, rather, to how I am going to say this. General manager of the Giants, Joe Shane, talking on the subject of Saquon Barkley, which leads into his discussion with his scouts on Daniel Jones. Quote, "You're paying Daniel Jones $40 million. It's not to hand the ball off to a $12 million back." It's funny in retrospect looking at that quote now, seeing that the Eagles paid Saquon Barkley $12.663 million. And Shane, in that discussion, said what team is going to be willing to pay Saquon Barkley this much money in a market with potentially Josh Jacobs and Tony Pollard and Derrick Henry. What team is going to be willing to do that? Because as the Giants, we cannot do that. We can't do that because we have a $40 million quarterback who has yet to prove if he is the guy. So we have to get rid of the running back because we have to make sure that this guy, without having a life vessel behind him, can be the quarterback, can be the $40 million guy. Now just think about that for a second. Sit on that quote. I'll read it again. You're paying Daniel Jones $40 million. It's not to hand the ball off to a $12 million back. Now, if that's Aaron Rodgers currently with a win now Jets team, yeah, you're probably not paying a running back $12 million and just asking him to hand the ball off. You brought in Aaron Rodgers for a reason. You're paying him that such for a reason, to elevate the passing game, to elevate all the elements around him. But would the Jets do it if they could? Daboll was from the Howie Roseman tree. And you know who did pay said running back $12 million? Actually, a little bit more than that. Howie Roseman. And the word that kept coming back in that discussion is running back, running back, running back. Now, I get the thought that if Daniel Jones sees Saquon behind him or sees him in the flat, yeah, I'm just going to dish it out to him. And Jalen Hurts absolutely should do that this year. But if your argument is to get rid of an elite football player in his prime because you haven't seen enough from a quarterback that you already have invested $40 million per year into to force his hand as a passer, I think that's a rear end backwards way to look at that. Instead of how can we use Saquon, not just as a running back, how we continue to talk about him here at LOE, as an offensive weapon. How are you going to use him in the pass game? How are you going to use him as a rusher? You're idiotic if you think the Eagles are going to hand him the ball 250 to 300 times. You're not going to slam him into a wall that many times. That's insane. That's insane. But you added him because it was a market inefficiency. Take away the running back title, and look at the total output at what he could produce. As we keep saying, that's Darnell Mooney money. But the rationale that you need to see, if this guy can do it, so we're going to take away that $12 million cap hit and invest in more weapons to protect your quarterback, because offensive linemen, they got to be seen as such. They're weapons these days. To have more pieces to protect my QB that I don't know if he's the guy. Are you doing the best thing by your quarterback? That's how I see it. Are you doing best by your QB? And I say that because we saw Carson Wentz. We saw what happened. We saw what happened when Nick Foles had to try to throw to guys that weren't Deshaun Jackson and Jeremy Maclin that first time around. Or rather, he did throw to J-Mac that last year, excuse me. But you surround your quarterback and you pay elite playmakers. I don't get that. I don't get the rationale to force your hand one way. It's like, what is that dumb quote? Like cutting off your nose to spite your face? It's essentially what it feels like. I get surrounding your quarterback with an offensive line. But how are the rest of these teams doing it? To say that even Patrick Mahomes couldn't do that? Well, Andy Reid saw it 1 year and he changed the entire offensive line. Daniel Jones, yeah, they've made some additions on the offensive line, but What more do you need to see? That's where Lou and I on this thing are like, cry me a river. Keep the great playmaker. Find somebody else that can pair with him. And don't pay this guy $40 million. Cut bait. The Eagles have done it. Other teams have done it. Denver just did it. They signed the guy to a freaking extension that hasn't even kicked in yet and sent him to Pittsburgh. Saquon Barkley, I think he looks great. Went to the team in the Philadelphia Eagles that I'm sure the Maras who were pleading in that Hard Knocks episode to keep Saquon, they're a little bit ticked off that Howie Roseman was the guy to sign him for more than $12 million. And that $12 million back, it's going to be a nice compliment to the A.J. Brown, to Dallas Goedert, to Devontae Smith, and Jalen Hurts. And I hope you give us a nice compliment here at Locked On Eagles by subscribing to the show and tuning in to each episode, 5 episodes each and every week. I know there was a little period there in June where we got down to 3 to 4 episodes. That's all right. We're back to 5. We were on vacation. We got to live our lives. We do this thing 365 days a year, but we're back. Continue to tune in. Thank you to all the everydayers who continue to make this show and the fan base the best there is. Tomorrow is episode 1400. It is also the 4th of July. So thank you to all those who have served, who are serving, anyone with loved ones around the military. A great day to remember all of them as well. And to just appreciate everybody around you. Go enjoy your time with your loved ones. But at the same time, tune in to Locked On Eagles each and every day, whether you're watching us on YouTube, whether you're listening along. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you check us out on Twitter as well. You can check me out at GC24_football. Check out my co-host at DiBiase, LOE. Check out the mothership at Locked On Birds. Make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Sports National YouTube channel. Make sure you tune into any show based around Philly. Locked On Flyers, Locked On Phils. We got it all. Locked On Sixers. Continue to watch all the Locked On shows. We're going nowhere. But thank you as always. Signing off. I'll leave you like I always do. Fly, Eagles, fly.